So have you guys ever wondered what the MCU would look like if the Marvel Cinematic Universe had access to all of its characters and not just the likes of the Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and a few others sprinkled in there, but rather if they had the likes of the X-Men, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four under their belt at the beginning of the Cinematic Universe? What would the MCU look like in modern day? And I'm about to answer that question, but if you are new around here and enjoy what ifs and everything to do with Marvel, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're trying to push to 10,000 subscribers. Let's try and reach that goal. With that said, let's get straight into this. So this will be broken up into 3 phases, just as the Marvel Cinematic Universe was until Avengers Endgame. I'm going to try and give a coherent story from the start of phase 1 all the way up until the end of phase 3, introducing commonplace themes and commonplace stories that all kind of align and build upon one another. The issue with having access to every single Marvel character in the entirety of the Marvel Universe is that there is too much to play with. So there will be characters and there will be stories that don't feature here that maybe some of you guys would have liked to have seen. So I can only apologize if I don't give a movie or a story to your favorite character. But with that out of the way, let's get straight into phase 1. We kick off this brand new Marvel Cinematic Universe with, of course, the founding fathers of superhero families. It is, of course, the Fantastic Four. This film's main purpose is to set the groundwork for the cinematic universe and largely just to introduce all of these different characters. We introduce the family, we give them the origin story, we will also introduce Victor Von Doom as well, we will make him a mainstay character and introduce him as a force that will gradually grow throughout the universe. I imagine the villain of this film would probably be Mole Man or someone a little lower level. We will also get mention or cameos from Hank Pym and Tony Stark, as they also know Reed Richards in this universe as well. And it's also revealed that Tony Stark is already Iron Man, and Iron Man was the only superhero up to this point within this universe, but now the Fantastic Four have also become superheroes as well. While it was only right to have the Fantastic Four be the first film in a complete Marvel Cinematic Universe, obviously Marvel's most popular character, Spider-Man, has to come next. That's why the next film in the cinematic universe and in phase 1 will be Spider-Man. Now, in this alternate timeline, obviously the Tobey Maguire movies and the Andrew Garfield movies never happened, so I imagine this film would set Peter Parker right back to his basics and he would be in high school once again. Contrary to popular belief, I also don't believe Gwen Stacy or Mary Jane Watson would have been the love interest straight away right out of the blocks. I do believe for the first film, Betty Brant would have actually been the love interest. If we remember from the comics, Gwen and MJ weren't actually introduced in the Amazing Spider-Man comics until Peter was in college, and I think the same thing would happen here. Betty Brant would be the love interest for the first film, however it wouldn't work out because Peter would be Spider-Man. The villain of this film, similar to Spider-Man Homecoming, would be the Vulture. I think the Vulture has always been a good Spider-Man villain to give him at the start of his career, so he'll be the villain here. We will also introduce other characters like Norman Osborn into this film as well, just to kind of give a little bit more of a scope to what the films could lead to in the future. Peter will graduate from high school at the end of the film. I'm not going to ponder around a whole trilogy of him in high school. We want to advance this story pretty quickly because there are more stories to tell in Peter's college years that I think are very important. We will also get a little cameo from Johnny Storm at the end of this film as well, which is obviously referencing that really cool relationship they have in the comics. The third film in phase 1 will be another popular superhero team before the MCU, and that is of course the X-Men. Now I imagine this film being quite similar to X-Men First Class. Wolverine will also not be a part of the team at this point in time. It will also follow Professor X, building that relationship between mutants and society. Magneto will also be the villain, and he will eventually be defeated at the end of the film. I imagine the team would consist of the likes of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Angel, and Beast. A modernized version of the X-Men, but one that also does stay true to its roots as well. We then move on to the next film in the cinematic universe, which is going to be Captain America: War Hero. So this will be very similar to the film that we actually got in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It follows Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, in World War II. We obviously follow everything that happened with Hydra and the Red Skull, and just like in the actual film, there is heavy emphasis on Howard Stark and connections to modern day Avengers characters, which cements this film as a big part of the cinematic universe. At the end of the film, after defeating Red Skull, he gets frozen in the ice, and that leads us onto our next film in Phase 1, which will be The Avengers. Now, as you will have noticed, a lot of the Avengers characters like Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Ant-Man, none of these guys really got solo movies up until this point, and that's because if Marvel had access to all of their characters, I don't think resources would have been put into those films. As much as I'm trying to tell a cohesive story, I'm also trying to keep some realism at the same time, and I do believe that the likes of Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Ant-Man, they wouldn't have got solo films. I reckon it would have been straight into an Avengers film. The only one that I can see happening is, of course, Captain America, and that's because I feel like Captain America was a big enough name to get his own solo film before the MCU popularized the likes of Iron Man, etc. But this film would actually follow the Age of Ultron storyline, and instead of Tony Stark creating Ultron in this new universe, it would be Hank Pym that ends up creating Ultron. However, the conflict arises in this movie when Tony Stark doesn't actually agree with Hank Pym on creating Ultron, saying that it would be too dangerous. Of course, Ultron ends up becoming a threat, and Tony ends up looking for help, which leads to him digging up Captain America from the ice, and Cap ends up helping the team. Of course, the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man would also be involved at this point as well, but they would not be the main characters of this film. Rather, it would be a film surrounding Hank Pym, Tony Stark, and Captain America. The film ends with Nick Fury from S.H.I.E.L.D. stepping in, unionizing them as the Avengers, a force for good, seeing potential in heroes teaming up. We then move on to Phase 2, with Phase 1 wrapping up with the Avengers film. Phase 2 would open with a Wolverine solo movie. I don't really have to say anything more than it's just a Wolverine origin. We get Logan's origin, we also get a Steve Rogers cameo as well, because it is also set, obviously, in the 1940s. The next film in Phase 2 will be the second Spider-Man film, Spider-Man 2. This will take place with Peter going to college, and this is now where we introduce the likes of Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson, and of course Harry Osborn. And we know Norman Osborn will also be more of an influence in this film from the first as well, building up his character and his eventual turn to the Green Goblin. However, in this film, Doc Ock will be the main villain of the movie. He will be a professor at ESU, and he will eventually turn into Doc Ock. Gwen's father, Captain George Stacy, will also die at the end of this film as well, adapting the death of Captain Stacy from the comics. The film will end with Norman Osborn taking Peter under his wing, obviously setting up a big sequel. The next film in Phase 2 will be The Incredible Hulk. Now, this film will actually be very similar to the version that we got from the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe, except it will just be more of a Hulk origin story. We'll still have Betty Ross in there. General Thunderbolt Ross will be a very big character in this film as well. The film will then end with, of course, Abomination and Hulk coming to blows, and Nick Fury approaching Bruce Banner at the end for a second chance, after obviously creating the Avengers in Phase 1. The next film in Phase 2 will be Fantastic Four 2. Now, this is where Doctor Doom will become a main villain. However, he won't be defeated at the end of the film, but rather only subdued to a point. Ben Grimm will also die at the end of this film, breaking the team in half. This will almost be a win for Doctor Doom, and will thrust him into a higher position, wanting nothing but power, saying that the worst is yet to come for the Fantastic Four. And this will worry Reed Richards as we end the film there. The next film in Phase 2 will be called Captain America: Man Out of Time. Now, similar to Captain America: The Winter Soldier, this film will follow Cap in modern day, and will show how out of time he is. However, instead of obviously focusing on Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, it will more focus around Captain America, seeing how corrupt society has come in the modern day. The villains of this film will be the Serpent Society, who will have formed after the uprising in superheroes after the first Avengers film. The next film in Phase 2 will be called X-Men: Mutant Massacre. Now, of course, following from the actual comic run Mutant Massacre, the X-Men will be perceived as unstoppable after their first film. Mutants will be on the uprising, and after the formation of the X-Men, mutants will become commonplace. However, the X-Men will almost become egotistical in a way, thinking that they are basically unbeatable, and this film will basically showcase their downfall, that they are beatable, breaking the team by the end of the film. The team is left broken by the end of the movie, similar to how the Fantastic Four were left broken by the end of their film. And this leads us straight into the next film in Phase 2, which will be Spider-Man 3. Now, similar to the Fantastic Four and the X-Men movies in this phase, Spider-Man 3 will focus on breaking down Peter Peter Parker. There's a similar theme to what's happening to all of our heroes, and you'll start to realize what is going on as we reach the end of the phase. However, of course, Norman Osborn will finally become the Green Goblin, and he will kill Gwen Stacy. This is the grand finale for Spider-Man, and this is going to be Peter's breaking point. Peter will also eventually finish college at the end of this film as well, but he is left broken and with nothing, as Gwen Stacy, the love of his life, is now dead. And this leads us into the grand finale of Phase 2, which is Avengers Civil War Part 1 and Part 2. We kick off Part 1 with everyone at their lowest point. Everything is at breaking point, everyone is fighting each other already, and it will only take one more straw to break the camel's back. And of course, the Accords are put forward by General Thunderbolt Ross after, in a battle which included the X-Men, left hundreds of civilians killed. The Accords are now put forward, and every superhero has a decision to make, either to retire or to sign them and to be under government control. Of course, Tony Stark decides to sign them, as he is also joined by Hawkeye, Black Widow, and most people who work under Nick Fury. He's also joined by Hank Pym, who wants to rectify his mistake with Ultron. Reed and Sue also join sides with Tony for now. However, Captain America is against them, thinking that the government should never be able to control where the heroes spread their influence. Obviously, after his film, learning how corrupt society is nowadays, he obviously will be against the government. His team will consist of the Human Torch, Sam Wilson, the Hulk, and some of the X-Men. Most of the X-Men, however, including Cyclops, stay neutral in the conflict as to not rally the public against the mutants. Spider-Man also stays neutral at the start of this as well, because of what happened to Gwen Stacy. However, Tony manages to convince him to join his side, manipulating him by saying he'd have to give up being Spider-Man and Gwen would have died for nothing. Peter naively joins his side and reveals his identity, thinking Tony to be right. And that's when the big twist happens. One of Spider-Man's villains ends up gunning down Aunt May. And this leads us into Avengers Civil War Part 2. This changes everything, as Cap and his team have more fuel to the fire, and Spider-Man ends up switching sides because after the death of Aunt May, he realizes that Tony Stark was wrong. If everyone knew superheroes' identities and everything about every superhero ever was public knowledge, people in their personal lives would take a massive hit. This film will then follow what the destruction of the Accords are causing, and more people are dying than need be. Cap and Tony end up fighting it out till the death, until Cap, unfortunately, like the comic books, dies in the final battle. And that's when Tony Stark finally wins. Reed and Sue convince Johnny to switch teams, and Sam Wilson, along with some of the X-Men, are detained for a short while. When Tony is asked if Peter Parker is to be detained, Tony lets him off, as he's been through too much. Hank Pym at the end of this film also gives up being Ant-Man, wanting to step back from this life. But either way, no one wins. No hero came out on top, and everyone lost. Tony even feels remorseful for the death of Captain America. Tony brought him into this world by digging him up from the ice, and he eventually ended up taking him out. And with this dark ending to Phase 2, we go into Phase 3, which kicks off straight away with another X-Men film, X-Men Dark Phoenix. The X-Men reform after Jean Grey becomes Dark Phoenix because they feel the need to rebuild what was lost. After the events of Civil War, the X-Men are very sparse and the team wasn't what it was. However, obviously, to combat the Dark Phoenix, they do feel the need to come back together again and to help Jean Grey. Wolverine in this film will also join the team, and this is when we get more of a modern version of the X-Men. The second film in Phase 3 will be called Ant-Man's Second Life. This film will actually follow Scott Lang as he takes up the mantle of Ant-Man, replacing the old Hank Pym. I imagine this being very similar to the actual Ant-Man film that we got in Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, except Hank Pym, I reckon, would be a little bit more involved. The next film in Phase 3 will be called Captain America Legacy, obviously following Sam Wilson after he's on bail after Civil War, as he vows to try and continue Steve's legacy by becoming Captain America and continuing what Steve Rogers fought for. The Winter Soldier will also be the villain of this film, introducing Bucky Barnes as Steve's past comes back to haunt Sam. The next film in Phase 3 will be another team-up film, which will be The Thunderbolts. Leading on from Captain America Legacy, and with Bucky Barnes wanting to start a new life after being reformed at the end of that film, the Thunderbolts are formed with Ross becoming the Red Hulk. Since the Accords obviously were a failure, Ross resorts to hiring supervillains to complete government tasks, and I imagine this film will be very similar to James Gunn's Suicide Squad in that kind of style and that kind of vibe. The next film in Phase 3 will be Spider-Man 4, wrapping up the events of Spider-Man 3 and everything that happened to Peter throughout the Civil War event. Peter will be dealing with his identity reveal and the death of Gwen and Aunt May a little more. Feeling like he can't have a life anymore, he separates himself from Harry and MJ. The villain of this film will of course be Symbiote and Venom, which feeds off Peter's dark past. Eventually, MJ brings him back from the light, and Peter defeats Venom, and MJ and Peter get together at the end of the film. However, the consequences of Civil War still loom over Peter, as this is all in vain, and he still has to go into hiding. The next film in Phase 3 will be The Fantastic Four #3. This film will see the Hulk join the team, taking Ben Grimm's place, adapting the new Fantastic Four from the 90s. This film will directly set up the next crossover, having it build up to Doom's grand plan. Kind of like throughout most of Phase 3 in the real Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thanos was kind of a looming threat over all of the heroes. This is how Doctor Doom will feel in this film, and having that feeling that whatever Doom is planning is inevitable. And this leads us to the grand finale of the entire 3 phases, which will be called Avengers Disassembled. Similar to the comics, the Avengers start dying in the actual disassembled run, including Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Hank Pym. This leads to Sam Wilson to take control of the team, in which is a real test of his character and everything that he has learned. What also makes this more impactful is not only is this a reference and also a slight adaptation of the comic book story Avengers Disassembled, the Disassembled name also represents the fact that the Avengers are at their lowest point after Civil War. The Fantastic Four are also main characters in this film as well, as it's revealed that Doctor Doom is slowly killing off the superheroes. The F4 and the Avengers, led by Reed and Sam, set aside their differences from Civil War and defeat Doom once and for all. Realizing that accords or no accords, the superheroes all have to work together eventually. And them being separated, divided, and disassembled is what could cause the death of humanity. And with that, I bring you to the end of my pitch of what if the MCU had all of its characters from the very beginning. Obviously, there are lots more stories to tell. I imagine a Phase 4 in this cinematic universe could maybe go more cosmic, maybe introduce the Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, Doctor Strange, Beyonders, maybe even Madam Web, Thanos, the Eternals. There are so many other characters and other stories that you could introduce and do. Obviously, like I mentioned at the start of the video, there's definitely going to be some stories or some characters that I didn't include in here that you guys probably would have liked to have seen. But like I said, I think obviously when Marvel has all of its characters, you're going to get ones that maybe get slightly mistreated or don't get the attention that they deserve. I think it was probably a blessing in disguise that the MCU ended up the way it did, because that meant that Marvel had to be more creative with their stories and had limited characters to play off of. But either way, if Marvel did have all of their characters, I imagine it being something similar to this. Let me know in the comment section down below, if Marvel had all of their characters from the very beginning, what would the MCU have looked like? Thanks for watching. On the left hand side of the screen, you can see my pitch for a Spider-Man cinematic universe, and on the right hand side of the screen, you can see my pitch for an MCU Spider-Man college trilogy. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care and peace.